Oh my god. I'm losing my mind. Just a tiny bit. If y'all don't, follow me on Twitter, you guys don't know. However, I picked up how many books? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 of Simon Dazai books, right? Because I already had No Longer Human. And I've read No Longer Human multiple times over. I wrote a whole, very important school essay on No Longer Human too. Like, it was that bad. But fun fact, I absolutely hate No Longer Human. Not in, like, I hate the writing. No, I hate the protagonist. Because he's so pompous and full of himself. Like, if you've never read No Longer Human, and I'm going to go read Tales from the Hinterland very soon. However, if you've never read No Longer Human, it's about a man named Yozo Alba, and basically he's the scum of the earth. This is in a post-World War II Japan. It is World War II. Yeah, post-World War II Japan. And Ho ho ho! There's a lot of communist stuff in there, I'm not gonna lie. There's a lot of communist stuff in there. But the thing is, right, Yozo full on says, and I won't quote it, I love quoting it because it's so bad, but he basically says that, his 10 misfortunes, 10 things that are wrong in his life, can easily, top anyone else's misfortunes. Like, he is the most vile of human beings. He's right, but he's also the most sad and undeserving of all this pain and suffering he has to go through. And that all of his 10 misfortunes can trump everyone else's problems. Like, he has the most problems in the world. Like, his problems trump everyone else's. And he even goes on to say that, hey, I don't understand. If you don't want to kill yourself, then your griefs aren't really genuine, are they? Excuse me? People can have problems and not want to kill themselves. That's... It makes me so angry. And I'm angry for a reason. And, it's so bad. It is so bad. I hate him. I hate him. I hate him. Come to find out. Oh, I forgot to mention the most fun part of No Longer Human. No Longer Human was basically, Osamu Dazai's suicide note to the world. Because, from what I can find... Hold on. I have to... Last book published by Osamu Dazai. No Longer Human. Yep. No Longer Human. No Longer Human was the last one he published. And in my eyes, it can basically be seen as a suicide note. Because after he published No Longer Human, I don't know what the time frame is, but he published No Longer Human, and then he committed double suicide with someone and drowned. And that's what happened. If you've ever watched Bungo Stray Dogs, you now know why Dazai in Bungo Stray Dogs is the way he is. Because, haha, fun fact, that's how the actual person was. Oh my gosh. Not to mention, in No Longer Human, it just passingly mentions that the helpers in Yozo's house, right? Because he was a rich motherfucker. The helpers in his house probably sexually assaulted him, and I can't even say anything about that because he just mentions it so passively. Like, he himself doesn't know what happened, and then he blames... There's so much stuff that happens in No Longer Human, and I might read them on stream. You might see my dissent after we finish Tales from the Hinterland. Mentioning Tales of the Hinterland, I am speaking in like 5 things per second. Oh my gosh. But in No Longer Human, not No Longer Human, talking about Tales from the Hinterland, we only have 2 stories left, and I plan on reading both of them if I can, and then starting a new book, because I have, from the books that I mentioned last stream, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, that's 4, 5, 6. I have 6 new books to add to the already pile of 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 books. So we now have 11 books to choose from after they finish. And that's something. Truly. That is something. So, you know, we're chilling. And we're back in the room again. There's a better version up on the YouTube thumbnail, which you can properly see my trans flag? Not trans flag. Not binary flag. I'm gonna be I don't want to remake this room, but I feel a need to. Like, I need to remake it. So, I might not. Who knows? We have a book to read. And today's first story is called Twice-Killed Kathrine. And I've been looking forward to this one because I know absolutely nothing of it. And all I know is that the last 2 stories are Twice-Killed Kathrine and Death in the Woodwife. Don't know what they're about. We're gonna find out. Twice-Killed Kathrine. An enchanter lived in a house with rooms beyond counting, in the shadow of an ancient oak. He had a string of wives behind him and as many children as his house had doors, because when he was young he'd learned the secret of long life. Using sweet smoke and words stolen from a witch, he'd coaxed his own death from his body, hidden it in an acorn, and buried the acorn below his window. The branches of the oak that rose from the acorn still tapped against the glass, but the wise old face of the tree's trunk that once spoke to him had long ago gone quiet. The enchanter, rich and as handsome as he had been when he seduced the witch who gave up the words, had no shortage of wives when he wanted them. His latest was beautiful and young and prouder than he'd given her credit for, with a will nearly as strong as his own. She was determined he would end his dalliances with the servants and in town, and fixed her heart on making his life a misery if he didn't. And so, when the stable master's wife told the enchanter she was carrying his child, he was set on keeping it a secret. After receiving word that the midwife had come to the stable master's cottage, the enchanter dispatched the raven that was his familiar to stand watch the window. The laboring woman saw the blackbird peering in and was afraid for herself and the child she carried. When the baby came, it was red-haired and blue-eyed, with a hard chin and blade-cut mouth, every inch the enchanter's child. But the stable master's hair was ruddy enough, and a purse of gold convinced him to accept the girl as his own. She was called Kathrine, and she grew up in solitude. Her mother resented being closeted with a baby in their crude quarters, and the stable master didn't care for children. Kathrine would have been lonely, had she not learned, early on, that she had a powerful affinity for growing things. She gave flowers new ambitions, convincing them to creep free from their beds and up around her windowsill. She coaxed a bounty from her mother's mean kitchen garden, and made the grass around the door grow thick and high, never suspecting she was drawing from the slipstream of magic that ran in her blood. But she was always fascinated by the enchanter's oak tree. His servants knew without being told that the oak was not to be disturbed, never pruned nor otherwise tended. Even its shade was shunned, having an unsettling texture to it, and of something you could peel back and fold or step into and be lost completely. Kathrine did not share their fears. When she was old enough to crawl, she crawled toward the tree. When she learned to run, she ran to it. Her miserable mother always caught her, until Kathrine grew old enough to take care of herself, and her mother gave up trying. "Go," she said, "and curse yourself if you wish. Let the old tree swallow you, or the ground for all I care. Let the enchanter himself find you and beat you, if it teaches you at last to be still." Kathrine took her mother's abuse in silence, as she always did, waited till the woman wasn't looking, and fled to the tree. Over the creek, past the stables, through the enchanter's gardens, to where its shadow spread over the grass like a pool of black water. It was cool and dark and slightly blinding. clinging to her skin. She laid a hand on its bark and felt it grow keen beneath her fingers. It was the same feeling she had when making a tomato plant grow out of season, or convincing a bush that bore only leaves to bud with flowers. She put a foot on the trunk and settled her fingers in the furrows. She began to climb. Though the enchanter's body was young, his mind was old beyond reckoning. He looked sometimes at the aged, twisted oak and marveled that he'd known it when it was a dream inside an acorn. His mind still ran like quicksilver, still sparked with water over rocks and sun, still wandered and lusted and questioned and raged. But sometimes when he looked at the tree's scarred trunk, he felt very old indeed. It was one such time when, gazing into the oak's shifting leaves, the enchanter saw another face peeping out at him. It was sharp and fearless, and a cunning kind of quiet. It looked just like his own. Having long forgotten about the Saber Master's wife and his little red-haired byblow, the enchanter was startled, a thing he rarely was. I realized I forgot to do something. Hold on. I finished the paragraph. Trust me, I finished the paragraph. I just, have to be a good VTuber real quick, because I was busy doing stuff as I got ready. Let me be a good VTuber. Please, please. What we do is we put it on reading Tales from the Hinterland by Melissa Albert. Come join me, VTuber. Burper? VTuber Ian. VTuber. Small streamer. Constantine live. Boop. Bonk. Y'all, I started getting bots in my, that was a quick recovery, jeez. But I started getting bots in my comments. Have I made it? Have I made it? Jeez, okay. Hold on. Let me get a sip of water. Sip of water. Just turn into Southern real quick. Keep reading in a Southern accent. Who are you? Back to the story. That was real hard cut. Who are you? He asked in a voice that sounded less than commanding. Are you my death returned? The creature in the tree said nothing. Do you come to remind me of my own mortality? He said, go back, feed the oak, and be patient. I have much work to do before I have need of you. Kathrine watched him in startled silence, and he might have turned away, still believing her to be his long-deferred death, having crept out of the acorn to glare at him. But just then she lost her footing. She clung to the branches, her face colored with surprise, and he realized she was no uncanny thing, but a child. And he remembered the baby who had looked at him with such composure more than a decade ago, when he went to strike a deal with the cuckolded stable master. In one motion, he lunged over the windowsill, his body stretching unnaturally, arms long as branches, and pulled the girl into the house. Kathrine knew when to be quiet. She knew how to stand very still, so she no more caught the eye than a footstool did. And if she were to be kicked or slapped, it would be with the impersonal violence enacted upon an inanimate thing. She stood before the enchanter, his rough brown robe and its sleeves pushed up, and the raven on his shoulder. His face was so exactly like her own that it answered a question she never thought to ask. Are you not afraid of my tree? His voice was stern, but she sensed he was pleased by the notion. She shook her head. They say the touch of its shade will flatten you like a flower and deliver you straight to death. They say the nod of my head could flay you where you stand, that my voice alone is deadlier than a goblin's kiss. Are you unafraid, or just foolish? Do you not believe what they say about me? Catherine's face was composed, but he saw the nervous motions of her fingers. Then he saw what was happening beneath them, flowers, growing from a crack in his windowsill. They budded and bloomed and died and began again. She spoke no words, only looked at him. But under her hand, there was magic. She's just that good, guys. When his children came of age, the enchanter would test them to see if they'd inherited his abilities. On finding them lacking, he sent them out into the world to marry or seek their fortune or do whatever they wished. Ooh, don't want it. Don't know. No, no, no. No, no, no. Where am I? There we go. Hold on. There we go. There we go. Okay, so everything's fine. We're not having weird music. Promise. Kathrine was the first of his offspring to have his gift, and he meant to teach her. That first day, he didn't let on to her that he saw what she was doing, that its name was magic. Instead, he let his oak lean close to the window so she could go out the way she had came. He meant to prepare his workshop for a student who would, in time, become an enchanter herself, one he could hold in his thrall and use as a secondary source of power. It was lucky she was a woman, and easier to sap, and simpler to sap. When his preparations were made, he sent a servant to fetch her, and learned she could not come. The wasting sickness that placed the nearby town had reached the stablemaster's house, and Kathrine had fallen ill. He worked out how to save her, brewed a tincture that could do it, but when he carried the medicine to her cottage, she was already dead. The enchanter stood at her bedside, looking upon the withered little face so much like his own. Her mother gaped at him, dry-eyed and very far from the fox-pretty maid he'd once sported with in the rooms of his house. Something moved in him, a weakness he hadn't faced since divorcing himself from death. Grief. For just one moment, he mourned the dead girl in the bed. Before he could think better of it, his hands were weaving the air, turning it thin and bright and unbreathable, as he worked a heavy enchantment. It made his bones creak and brought out lines of silver in his hair. It made his oak tree drop its leaves and groan low, the sound of it running through his house and filling its occupants with dread. He could not return the girl's life to her. It was gone. He could not take her death away. She'd already spent it. So he gave her a different kind of gift. Her body was freshly dead, still warm. And where there's warmth, there is hunger. He gave that hunger eyes. He gave it will. He shaped its formless turning into something pointed as a dagger. That dagger cast about the room, seeking the life it longed for. Drawn in by the beat of blood and breath and the high, curdling flavor of fear, it fixed itself on Katherine's mother, fitting its invisible mouth to hers and drawing out her life. As the woman's hair faded to ash and her bones curled in like fingernails, the girl in the bed shifted. She moaned. She opened her eyes. Kathrine was not unchanged by death. When her body uncaged her mind, it went far below. She found herself in Death's kingdom, that airless realm of mineral trees and floors of blue agate, where there is no sun or sky, but a distant pearly ceiling. She reached for her magic, that green-fingered ability she drew on without knowing its name. In a land where nothing grew, she couldn't find it. She wanted to panic or grieve, and could discover the capacity for neither. Death's kingdom was no place for rosebuds or high emotions. Kathrine felt herself shrinking in its fist, felt the shearing of her power and the ebbing of her fear, when suddenly she was blinking, breathing, crying out on her own hard bed, in her own ravaged body. Life buzzed inside her like a fly seeking escape, throwing itself at her borders. She didn't know the life was her mother's. The enchanter told her nothing about it, but she was never easy with that life inside her. It was a flame too long given to flickering. And when she forgot her hour in the land of death, it had left its mark on her. Her bright hair now ran black. The gardens she tended grew florid with red flowers and dark fruit that numbed the tongue and drugged the senses. All the fresh green things she tried to grow collapsed into rot. She became something. That's for sure. This is why you don't decided to do necromancy. Kathrine was not the only victim of the wasting sickness. The enchanter's own wife walked into Death's kingdom 3 days after Kathrine left it. With no woman left to appease, the enchanter brought his illegitimate daughter to live inside his house. Her power grew by the day. She could make things move outside of their natures. She lit candles with a snap. She made her father's eyes ignite with a radiant greed, though at first she saw only the radiance. Dreamer than she'd been before dying, she was still quick-minded, clever, and keen to learn. Kathrine grew up in pieces. Her limbs, then her face, then the rest of her, until all at once she was a woman, legs too long beneath the hems of her dresses and hair still braided back like a girl's, framing the fine gold curves of her bones. Proud not only of her skill, but her beauty, the enchanter had a new wardrobe made for his daughter, and hired a maid to keep her. And on a spring day so fresh and soft and wet, it seemed it could break apart in your hands, he packed her into his fine carriage to show her off to the only one in the world whom he counted as his equal. The man they were visiting was another enchanter who deferred his death. Though the two old foes despised each other, they gilded their envy and scorn with fine words, meeting every 10 years to exchange gossip and brags. While the other enchanter traveled wildly, took many protégés, Kathrine's father lived his lifetimes in one place, and had never before had a student worth teaching. He wished to show his friend and enemy that he had sired a true enchanter. On the day they rode out, a week of heavy rains had sent the river welling past its shores, turning the road into a ribbon. The water carried in its arms not just fishes and fallen leaves, but ladies' shoes and gemstone buttons, polished bones still sighing, a cradle and a wooden doll with no mouth, a dread river-maid wrapped in weeds. Kathrine gazed into the waters, dreaming. When they arrived at the other enchanter's house, in a prosperous town on the banks of the river, she felt as out of place as the mouthless doll. The other enchanter's face was even younger than her father's, frozen forever at 20. He had yellow hair and eyes as old and cold as the stars. When he laid them on Kathrine, their force was such that she startled, a poppy blooming in her right hand and a black plum in her left. The beautiful man took her plum and bit into it, letting its juice run into the golden hairs of his arm. He licked it off and smiled at her. Kathrine took pains not to be alone with her father's rival. His eyes followed her about the room, sliding over her skin like will-o-wisps, as he watched what she could do, and the exhibitions of ability her father insisted she perform. They were to stay with this enchanter for a week, long enough for the two men to deride old acquaintances, exhaust their boasts, and finally grow so disgusted with each other they couldn't bear to meet for another 10 years. 4 days had passed when the golden-haired enchanter let himself into Kathrine's room. It was late, but he heard his key in the lock she'd so carefully thrown, and was sitting up in bed when he opened the door. "What will you do?" he asked playfully when he saw her expression. "Throw plums at me?" She did. "What are you gonna do? Throw plums at me? Yeah, bitch. I'll throw plums at you, bitch. Don't touch me." She brought all her magic to bear on confounding his path between the door and the bed, but she was young, and he was ancient, and her power to his was as drinking cup to the sea. Or so he thought, and she believed. He reached her, still laughing, his skin glowing in the candlelight. The feeling of his magic overpowering hers was a press at her temples, a cold absence in her hands. When he seized the front of her nightdress, she abandoned magic and went after him like a cat finding its way from a sack. Her nails found his cheeks, her teeth his throat, her knee the place between his legs. With a curse he rendered her still as the dead, nothing moving but her eyes and her tears and her drumming heart. No violation was enough for the wound she dealt his towering pride. He took his knife from his loosened belt and ran it down the side of Kathrine's face, as steady as a finger, watching her eyes widen in agony. Maybe it was the pain that allowed her to move just for a moment, long enough to lift her head and spit in his face. I love this girl so much already. Jeez. She's iconic. What? When her spittle hit his cheek, his mind was turned from thoughts of lust. He stopped caring whose daughter she was, and what the Cost might be if he broke her. He pressed his thumbs to her neck, slippery with blood, and squeezed. In my house, he hissed. You bastard girl. You witch. You vile thing. Kathrine's vision ran with bubbles like black champagne. She heard a voice in her ear, low and triumphant. I have you. Death said again. I have you again. I have you again. That's what he said. That's what he said. Then the dark wrapped her up completely, and she stood once more in that silent underground land that smelled like nothing and glittered with precious ore. The place where her stolen life had lodged was empty again, gaping like a throat and made willful by magic. As Kathrine looked about herself below, her hungry body stole the life from the golden-haired enchanter above. So intent he was on killing her, only death could loosen his hands from her neck. She woke soaked through with blood from her wounded face. The enchanter's body lay cooling on the floor. But if he cheated death, she's already had her 2 deaths. Does she die again? What? It was luck that made her father find them before the servants did. The man was not entirely insensible to his old foe's intentions to his daughter, and came too late to look in on her. When he saw the other enchanter dead and Kathrine alive beside him, he paused for just a moment, his face showing more cunning than regret. Swiftly he packed their belongings and a number of the other man's treasures besides. Before the sun had risen, they were on the road toward home. Man said, if you're gonna touch my daughter's gonna kill you, and honestly, good for her. I have a whole thing of water. Why did I decide to take a shot of Mio? That stuff's so bad. If Kathrine's first death left its film on her skin, her second dragged behind her like a mantle. Her footsteps made no sound, as if she walked again in the noiseless realm she remembered only in sleep. Her black hair blazed with a sharp white stripe. Her face healed poorly, the scar left by her attacker's knife clotting at her chin like candle wax. The enchanter could have healed it, but a scar was no barrier to magic, so it didn't occur to him. Kathrine might have removed it herself, but chose instead to grow accustomed to her altered reflection. More than that had changed. While her father treated her as he always did, she saw different things in him now. When he smiled, she sensed his hunger. When he touched her, rarely, a tap on the hand, fingertips on her shoulder, she felt the faint buzz in it, not of love or affection, but something darker, deeper in the bone. She could hardly bear his nearness. Twice dead now, Kathrine knew herself to be a thing that blocked the light. When her father took her to town, conversations cut out and laughter went cold. The townspeople feared the ageless enchanter and his heavy raven and his unspeaking mirror, the daughter who walked at his side. Her shadow had something of the oak trees about it, a depth and weight that made the unmagical shrink away. She wondered, still, about the oak tree. She'd never forgotten the words the enchanter had said to her as she perched like a bird in its branches. Are you my death returned? Often she walked beneath it, letting her shade run into the oaks like ink. The wizened face in its trunk had stilled its tongue many lifetimes ago, but before that day the enchanter leaned heavily on its counsel. It was a night in Kathrine's 19th year, as she ran her curious fingers again over its features, the wide mouth, the eyes obscured by ridges of brow, the nose a messy furrow, that it shifted at last from its heavy sleep. Daughter, it said, you are one like me. Out of respect, she snatched her fingers back, but felt no fear. How so, grandfather? You and I are death-fed. Its bullfrog lips pursed, my sap, your blood, are springs fed from death's own river. What does it mean to be death-fed? It means peace will elude us, but have faith. It will be ours. I don't understand. The oak tree sighed, heavy, gusting breeze that blew green leaves into her hair. I grow weary, my child. I would like, at least, to break my bond with the enchanter, to sleep without cease. Will you help me? I know nothing of death, said the girl, only that I've escaped it. The oak tree knew Kathrine's living mind could not hold the glimmer of death too long in its waters, and chose his words carefully. There is no escape from death, only delay, and you know more of dying than you remember. To help me, if you'll help me, you must seek out the witch from whom your father stole the words, those that allowed him to delay his death. Will you do this? Kathrine looked at her father's window. The shade was drawn and its edges lit, not with the yellow of candlelight, but the blue of magic being worked. She shivered to think of his scent when he drew too close. Clove and attar of roses, cloaking sulphur and bitter's tang of enchantment. His stippled jaw, the faint lines at his eyes that never deepened. When he'd found her bleeding in bed at the hand of his rival in that beautiful house in that prosperous town, it spared her only the briefest look and a handkerchief to press to her riven face. Yes, grandfather, I will. Only one path led to the witch's cottage. The white road laid out on the sea when the moon was one day from full. The witch had married a tide when she was young, and though the marriage didn't last, the moon had allowed her to keep the cottage that was her wedding gift. Oh, slay! Slay! Be unafraid, said the oak, and you will find the path grows firm as a stone beneath your feet. Long as the witch craved vengeance on your father, she will not hesitate to help you. Armed with cloak and boots, a knife and her magic, Kathrine left her father's lands to seek the witch and the words. She knew the sea lay past the edge of town, close if you had a horse and far if you didn't. On foot it took her 4 days to reach its shore. When she did, the new moon was rising, throwing fillings of silver over the water. Kathrine sat on the sand watching moonlight break over the top of the sea. A coracle bobbed among the waves, the fisherman inside it casting his line into the salt. It went taut and arms straining. He reeled in a piece of living light, wiggling like a worm as it came loose from the water. Again and again he cast his line until he had a whole bucket of squirming silver. Then he pulled to shore, climbing out to pull his vessel into the sand. He was broad but not tall, his hands were nimble, and his dark skin scored with a cross-hatch of scars over his arms, neck, face, as if he himself had once been caught in a net. He didn't look at Kathrine as he busied himself over his bucket. She'd spoken to no one since her conference with the oak tree, sleeping in secret places and staying hidden when the sun was out. But her voice sprang free of her now. What do you use to catch moonlight? A smile spread like butter over his scarred face. Damselflies. What do you do with it? Sell it to queens, to garnish the crowns. He was lying, she'd learn later. He was teasing her. The moonlight could be fermented with honey to make wine. It could be mixed with milk in a bath to soothe old bones. If you added it to lamp oil, your lamps burned brighter, longer, and kept ghosts away. There were many uses for moonlight harvested from the hinterland sea. Kathrine learned them all in the fisherman's cottage on the shore. When she married him, a month after they had met, they drank moon wine to celebrate. And when her belly swelled with pregnancy, he rubbed moonlight and fish oil over her skin to soften it, and over her scar where it tickled with old pain. When it ticked with old pain. Many months had come and gone by then. On the night before the moon was at her fullest, Kathrine always felt a pang remembering her promise to the old oak. But what was one woman's lifetime next to the life of a tree? She would seek out the witch when she was old. She wouldn't forget the oak tree's wish. Her labor began with a wrench and a rush of blood. Kathrine thought it would be easy, that her magic would soothe the birth along. Her husband had attended the births of animals both larger and smaller than she, and he thought they needed no midwife. Both of them were wrong. The baby fought against the birthing. Kathrine's body fought back, and it wasn't clear who would be the stronger. Kathrine lost blood, more of it, so much. The voice was in her ears again, the voice she hadn't heard since the golden-haired enchanter laid his hands on her throat. You are mine again, Death whispered. Here I am to catch you. In the end, the baby was stronger than its mother, and Kathrine's life gave out. No sooner had she touched down on death's cold road than her body was reaching for a life that could bring her back. Her baby was close, so close, its fierce little body still nestled inside her. Its life flowed like sap into Kathrine. She was empty-eyed and still in her birthing bed, then alive again and screaming, and her husband slid his hands into her room to pull the child free. It had slipped out gray-faced, with its parents' dark hair. Kathrine and her fisherman wept over it, his face on her shoulder and their hands on the child. But the baby's thieved life was small and unsteady. Like all those newly born, it kept its toes dipped toward death. Kathrine's body, weakened by blood loss and aflame with grieving and infection, extinguished it. Her husband's life was stronger. With the will she could not control, gifted to her by her father's dreadful magic, she took it. Twice killed again, alive once more, Kathrine lay on her bloody sheets, the baby stiffening on her belly and her husband's body slumped over her shoulder. A long time passed. She knew she must move, but could not. Her hands could not birth dark fruits, fleshy flowers. Her hands that could birth dark fruits, fleshy flowers, lay still. Her magic had died with her husband and child. It took 2 days for another fisherman's wife to peek into their cottage, and a day after that for the midwife to reach them. It was a week before Kathrine could sit up again. A week after that she was back on the road. The journey was longer this time. Her body was damaged, though her life force was strong. She could hear her husband's heartbeat in her own, through the ghostly twinges of injury that mimicked the flutter kicks of the child she carried. When she reached her father's land, it was not yet dark. She walked past the river and the stables and the silent oak. She walked through the enchanter's house, past startled servants, up to her father's workshop. She threw open his door. He was waiting for her, Raven on his shoulder. "My daughter returns." His brow seemed untroubled, but she knew him well, could read the rage in his tightening jaw. "Did you fail to find your fortune? Do you expect me to take you back, to continue your teaching? You've lost your beauty. You're dressed like a common fishwife. Your power is out of practice." She didn't say a word. Lying beneath the corpses of her husband and child, she'd worked out the shape of her curse, and knew who'd given it to her. She took a knife and ran it over her throat. Oh, she's iconic. That hungry, life-seeking piece of her rushed at the enchanter. His color was high, his bones unbowed. He crackled with good health, but his life was a thing with no shadow, a hard, bright pebble, edgeless. Without the presence of death to cast it into relief, it could not be peeled away. The house and its grounds hummed with people, servants, and children. The new wife the enchanter had taken in Kathrine's absence, the baby he'd put in her belly. But they were too far away. Nearer to Kathrine, and so imbued with magic by its master, and that its life shone with unnatural life, was the raven. Black-feathered, tarry-eyed, its ears elongated by its covenant with the enchanter, the bird hopped on one foot. Kathrine drank its life down. All but the last little sip, which was tied to the bird with magic. Not as powerful as the spell that made Kathrine unkillable, but nearly. That tiny piece of life folded itself up to the size of a seed, planting itself in the bird's smallest claw. When Kathrine woke, her front was heavy with blood and the bird clung to her shoulder. She felt their shared life tilting between them like the liquid in a spirit level. It wasn't enough. Staggering to her feet, ignoring the enchanter, she ran from the room. First they found a girl in a mini handkerchief. A shriek jerked out of her at the sight of Kathrine bleeding, weak and wild, her arm weighed down by the raven. "Go," Kathrine whispered, and the bird obeyed. In a flash of feathers it stole the girl's life, its talons flexing and Kathrine weeping with relief as their two bodies, hers and the raven's, were filled with it. God damn. The enchanter's deathless daughter made her way through his house. By the end of it, she glowed with stolen life, her skin plumped like a pastry, and her hair blazing red for the first time since she was a little girl. She held the bird against her breast like a baby as she returned to her father's room. He'd heard the music of massacre and done nothing. All his long lifetimes, cossetted by magic, had made him weaker instead of strong. Kathrine looked down at the fearsome enchanter who cowered before her. "I spoke with death when I was below. As my body tried to take your life, I petitioned him to help me, to kill you one way or another, and he told me something I wasn't wise enough to see." That, the old enchanter, for he was, despite his youthful face, very, very old, swallowed dryly. "What did death tell you?" "That there are things worse than dying." Fed on the strength of many, the girl and her raven descended on the enchanter and tore him into living pieces, as many pieces as years he'd given of ill-gotten life. Ever after, Kathrine kept a piece of her father hanging at her belt, his left eye, rolling in its pouch, seeing nothing. Her bird still carried in a cage, loosing it when she felt the life in her faltering, for she had work to do, stealing the lives of arrogant men, and those who would tangle the threads of magic. That's a sleigh, honestly. And then we have Death and the Woodwife, but I think I can be patient and wait for this. Wait for that. Um Ooh, that was fun. Ooh, that was fun. Ooh. I liked that one. That one. Ooh. But she forgot. She forgot about the oak tree. It's still alive. I mean, she has her father on her. Like, she got rid of his body and only has his eye, right? But, like, the poor oak tree. Save the oak tree. You got distracted by a fisherman who was harvesting moonlight. And I mean, sure, he wasn't scared of you, but you got distracted by Dick, honey. What? I love books. I love stories. Oh, that was fun. Oh, I had a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun with that one. And the last one we have is Death and the Woodwife, which sounds interesting. I mean, it is literally, just from the title alone, it sounds interesting. Oh. Fantastic. There's a cat with roses on the cover. Should I read it? I'll read it, actually. I'm impatient. We're back here again, guys. We're reading still. Look at me go. Getting 2 stories out. Ooh. Beware the hollow-eyed men who make their living on the road. Beware their riddles and the pretty things they sell. In a valley kingdom where summer ruled, a good king lived with his wife. In the years of their marriage, the queen gave birth to 3 daughters and 4 sons. A white rose bush was planted for every girl and a red for each boy. The queen and her children spent many happy hours in the scented shade of their garden. The years passed like turning pages, and accrued like golden leaves. The princesses grew lovelier, and the princes more handsome, until the day a wolf of the road came to their gates in the guise of a peddler. He stood at the courtyard's edge and sang up to the windows, "Jewels for your daughters, jewels for your daughters, satins for your sons, toys for your children. Me, I have none." Ooh. Let me... No, it was... I hate it when music has, like, moments of, like, silence before it actually ends. Like, it's annoying. The 7 royal siblings abandoned their lessons when they heard his song, running to the gates to let him in. In exchange for the rings on their fingers, he gave them brooches and scarves, carved cups and filigree thimbles. Soon they were running through the palace with their new trinkets, and the peddler was continuing on his wicked way, 7 royal rings flashing from his hands. The queen's youngest daughter died first, strangled by the peddler's necklace. Her oldest son was next, poisoned by the first swallow from his new willow cup. One by one, the princes and princesses fell, and by the time the king and queen heard of the coming peddler, it was too late. Their children were dead, and though they sent their fastest riders, they could not find the evil man. The queen's joy died with her children, the last of her youth, the golden net of her laughter. She grew thinner, until the ring slid from her fingers and made a harsh music on the floor. She might, the king thought, have found solace in her garden, but as each child died, their rose bush died with them. After her last child breathed his last breath, the queen took to her bed. She stayed there for 17 days and nights, eating nothing, deaf to her husband's pleas. On the 18th morning, she rose early and alone. On bare feet, she walked through her garden, counting the places where her roses had been. At last she reached the place where an 8th rose bush would have grown, had she given birth to another child. From its plot rose a black sapling, narrow as a spike and dotted with green flowers. When she moved to pluck one, a hidden thorn pierced her skin. As she carried the bloom back to the palace, 7 drops of blood fell to the earth behind her. Interesting. The next morning, 7 more saplings had sprung up from the queen's blood. She moved among them, her grief finally eased. Each day they grew higher, until their branches met overhead and they made a thorn grove. The queen spent her days in the grove, walking beneath its waving green flowers, with a glove always covering the hand the thorn had bitten. At first the king was grateful for his wife's change of heart, but her woman whispered that her grief had only taken a darker turn. Her hours beneath the trees were spent conversing with her dead children, laughing with them, singing them lullabies. The day came when she refused to leave them, demanding her bed be set at the grove's heart. The king could take no more. The thorn trees must be chopped down, he said, for the health of the queen. But whether out of fear or sympathy, none of his men could follow the order. And so the king, older than he'd been, walked to the grove that night with an axe over his shoulder. His queen waited for him in the dark, her own axe across her knees. "For the love we have shared, for the love of our children, you'll turn back from here," she said. One hand on the axe, the other on her belly, and the king saw something that made the spit dry in his mouth. She hadn't shared his bed for many nights. Though she hadn't shared his bed for many nights, the queen's body was swollen with pregnancy. He wasn't angry, but afraid. On shouldering his axe, he left his wife to her trees. He charged her women to keep her cool when they could, and warm when they must, and waited to see what she might birth in time. When her labor began, the queen paced and howled among the thorns. Sometimes she shouted, and sometimes she whispered, never to anyone the king could see. At the height of her pains, she tucked off the glove she wore on her left hand. The midwife drew an astonished breath, but the king could muster no surprise. The fingers the queen had long concealed were not fingers. They were 5 thorn branches, their nails round green buds. She labored long, and in laboring died, after giving birth to a tiny child whose skin was green in the light through the flowers. In her last moments, the queen ran her branching fingers over its head, blessing it in a language no one present knew. When the midwife carried the baby to the king, he saw that the tint of its skin was no effect of the light, but its true color. The midwife feared for herself, and she feared, too, for the child. She worried the king might kill it. Sickly, alien thing though it was, she didn't want to see it dead. But when presented with a small green infant, its head fuzzed with dark hair and its ears whirled tight, the king took it into its arms. He spoke over it, his own blessing. But the midwife had heard the words the queen spoke to her baby in that rolling thorn-tipped tongue, and knew the king was too late. Whatever the child would do or become, it would unfold under the auspices of the queen's last blessing. The queen was buried and mourned, her thorn grove chopped down, uprooted, and burned. The wet nurse claimed the child had writhed in her cradle as flame tore through the branches, but no one dared relate the tale to the king. The child grew up beautiful and maybe even good, though no one could be certain. She rarely spoke a word. The king adored her and spoiled her in every way she allowed, having claimed her entirely as his own. You could only imagine what a stepmother might make of the silent green-skinned princess, and he took no second wife. He kept his dead queen's memory close at hand, leaving her chamber exactly as it was when she was happy, before the peddler in the thorn grove. Her room was entered only by the maid who cleaned it, a flighty girl who didn't think to tell anyone of the single flower sitting in a glass by the queen's bed, still exhalting its strange perfume, as fresh as it was on the Languedoc day when she picked it. The maid only freshened its water and dipped her nose to its cup, looking at the queen's blood still clinging to the thorn below its petals. That's fun, actually. That's so fun. The princess's skin never lost its odd hue, nor her fingers their unnerving narrowness. And while she was quiet, it wasn't because she was foolish, as some imagined. nor dutiful, nor good. She was quiet because she was waiting for something worth her attention. She didn't find it in the king who made her call him father, or the nurse who attended her without love. She found a trace of it, perhaps, in the painted face of the queen, but it was no use pining for the dead. She might have spent the rest of her life looking for some unfindable thing in the corners of the palace. But when she turned 16, the king roused himself long enough to command all the eligible men in his kingdom to attend 3 nights of dancing in his hall. He sensed her daughter was dissatisfied and knew that finding a husband was her nearest means of trying on another life. For 3 days and nights, the palace filled up with princes and mothers and merchants and maidens, eldest brothers and 7 sons and girls who were spun so fast on the ballroom floor you could see nothing of them but their hearts, laid out like bait for wolves. In the first hours of the night, the queen's leaf-skinned daughter watched from her jeweled chair as tables were made and unmade before her. She must have looked lovely sitting there in a defiant white dress that made her skin grow greener. But the hours passed and the men in the room kept their distance. The night had nearly ended when the doors of the ballroom blew open with a crash, letting in a wind that made the candles gutter and the dancers draw close together, shivering. In the doorway stood a man with the bearing of a king and the saturated eyes of an animal. His hair was black as an empty sky and his jacket was sewn with stars. They winked their tiny lights at the princess as he approached her, holding out his hand. She was a girl who knew silence, who lived in and loved it. But when his fingers folded over hers and he drew her into the dance, she understood what silence really was. This beautiful man, with his predator's gaze, was as cold and quiet as a forgotten grave. His presence ate up the voices and the music and the laughter, so she heard only the soft sighing of his breath. When he let her go, half of the ballroom watched her with envy, the other half with fear. He bowed, kissed her fingertips, and took his leave. The dancers spun on. Chilled, though, by the stranger's touch, the princess closed her eyes. When she opened them, it was the second night of the ball. The dancing had begun. She was restless in sharp yellow satin, waiting on her chair, but no one dared approach her. Word of her mysterious suitor had spread. He arrived at last in a coat woven with the moon in all her aspects: infant, maiden, mother, warrior, seer. Again, they danced in his miniature realm of quiet and cold. After a time, the queen's daughter spoke into it. "Who are you?" The man smiled at her, the smile of a wolf. "Do you see the way the young look at me?" he said, with longing, with lust. "I'm so far from them. They think I'll never catch up. Now look at your father, and your old nurse beside him. See how they watch me with fear? Ask them. They'll tell you who I am." "I asked you," she said. "I am the quiet," he told her. "I am the cold. I am the thing that comes after the end." When their dance was over, when he took his hands from her skin, the noise crashed in. Before the third ball, the king came to his daughter's chambers. "Have caution," he told her. "Beware of making a promise before you've made your choice." She watched him in her mirror, eyes cool. "Beware of kings who speak in riddles," she said. Slay! That night she wore black gossamer. Her skin against the dress was the delicate color of a slit cocoon. The man arrived just before night tipped into day. He'd worn stars and moons, and now the princess thought he might come in stitched suns. Instead he wore a coat that jittered with bones, finger bones, jaw bones, the clattering bones of the feet. He pushed away the music and the whispers of those who watched them. Down a corridor of quiet he walked to her, tugging her to him as easily as he might snap a leaf off a branch. They danced again, but it was a formality. She couldn't hear the music. "Who are you?" she asked again. "I am a man who will wear a coat of knives on our wedding day," he said. "A crown of dreams, shoes of sand, and for our marriage bed, a coffin." Honestly, he wooed me. I don't know what to say, man. Then he took her 2 small hands in his one and sealed his mouth to hers, taking the breath she'd suck in when he gripped her. She supposed you could call it a kiss? She supposed, just maybe. When he slipped a ring onto her hand from his own smallest finger, the air around them shook with applause. The queen's daughter held her head high. She let the stranger take her wrist and dipped her head at the king, cursing herself for not listening to his sage advice. When the ball ended, she began planning her escape. Goddamn. The princess had long felt it her right to visit the dead mother's bedchamber. Through patient eavesdropping, she gathered the story of her birth and of the burning grove, but patience wasn't enough to gain entrance to the queen's locked rooms. Now she devised a plan to steal the key from the maid who kept it. She had need of her mother's counsel, and the woman was dead. Oh, perhaps she'd left something behind to guide her desperate daughter. Taking the key was easy. 3 glasses of punch to muddy the maid's head and silver scissors to cut the chain the key was linked to. Easy enough. Before the sun had fully risen, the princess was letting herself into her mother's rooms. There was a bed there, still lush with coverings, a cold fireplace clean as peeled wood, and a chest full of things the queen had brought from her parents' own palace long ago, treasures wrought in glass and metal and wood. On a table lay a nosegay of white and red roses, dried brown and black. There was a looking-glass and a trio of dolls with eerie faces and a footstool carved to look like a fat yellow dog. Dog. The queen's daughter lingered by none of these. Her eyes went to the flower, canted carelessly in its cup. Its bloom was the color exactly of her skin. Its stem the very shade of her hair. I can read, guys. I'm reading so well. When she took it in her hand, it lit like a lantern. From its petals rose 8 drifting ghosts, 4 handsome boys, 3 beautiful girls, and behind them a woman with long eyes and a sad smile. Speechless and shining, they beckoned at her. All moved their lips, but only the woman's words could be heard. "You are made of stronger stuff than he," the queen whispered to her daughter. "But your suitor has his tricks. If you wait until morning, it will be too late. Wear sturdy shoes and carry this flower. Go quickly now, and find your freedom in the woods." The princess left the palace by the kitchen door, setting off for the forest. By day she slept, and by night she walked. The green flower lit her way, and if she wandered from the path her mother set her, its light would falter. Always it led her towards secret byways, to places where berries grew. I need to stop sitting so close, leaning closer to my mic as I read. Jeez. Where moss made a soft bed, she walked for more nights than she could count, until she reached a clearing with a cottage at its heart. There her mother's ghost appeared to her once more. "Rest in this place and do not leave it," she said. "Plant the flower at the clearing's edge, and it will keep you safe. It is dangerous to be a princess. Forget your past. The one who seeks to marry you will forget you in time." Then she kissed her daughter with a touch like a leaf falling over a stone grave marker, and faded forever from sight. When she was gone, the girl who must no longer be a princess dug a hollow and planted the flower inside it. Then she knocked on the cottage door. Jess just doesn't like to see me win. YouTube scared me there for a second. Jeez. Don't scare me like that, YouTube. YouTube, you can't do that to me. Not to me. Oh, jeez. Okay. Fantastic. Great. Excellent connection. Yippee! Anyway, so we're back in the building again. The widow's son was a woodsman, handsome enough and willing to marry, but love of his old mother had kept him from seeking a wife. Now the two rejoiced in secret because the woods had delivered a bride to their door. The girl was skittish and loath to speak of her past, yet they knew they must win her in time. "Be patient, my son," said the old woman. "See how the girl fears to poke even her nose outside our clearing? She's running from something very dark indeed. When her fears have faded, she will make you a happy wife." The queen's daughter was no fool, but she was no woman of the world either, and did not perceive what the man and his mother were planning. When the woodsman took her hands in a year after her arrival at his cottage, speaking words of love she could not return, she was stricken with fear. She appreciated her protectors, yet no desire to become a woodwife. "I cannot be your bride," she said numbly. A cloud passed over the man's expression, but she hastened on, "unless you bring me what I desire." His brow cleared. "Anything." what would you have of me? She thought quickly, searching for a thing the maiden could never find, a treasure only a king could possess. He bowed then to hide a smile, because he knew what to give her. The story of the green-skinned princess born 17 years ago had spread far and wide, reaching even the woodsman and his mother. They guessed who the girl was long ago, and knew the flowering black tree was her own. The flowering black tree was her own. There, I can read, guys. I've been reading this entire time. Have you not been listening? I don't know what you're talking about. I'm talking to myself. Oh, gosh. A tree unlike any of the world, seen just once before in the thorn grove on the king's own grounds. He'd bring her a flower from the tree, and with that gift, claim her. The woodsman waited until the girl and his mother were busy in the kitchen and approached the tree. He'd never come so close before. Its perfume was too heady, its branches unpleasant. Now it seemed to him that the tree was crying out in a chorus of voices he could almost hear, telling him to keep away. He moved closer and the voices grew louder. Closer still, and the tree's shadows lit up with 8 translucent bodies, hands out in supplication, drifting like smoke. Though he was terribly afraid, he was more determined to catch his bride. The woodsman closed his eyes and plunged his arm into its branches. The thorn cut his skin and tore at it and still he reached, fingers closing around a green blossom and snapping it from its twig. He shuddered in the sudden cold, as all the sounds of the woods went quiet. From the cottage came the crash of something falling, and he quaked, wondering what he'd done. The cottage door opened. Through it came a girl he wished to make his wife, her arms before her, her eyes unseeing. She seemed not to hear him calling, nor to feel his hands as he attempted to hold her. She walked past the thorn tree and its broken protection into the wild woods. In her mind, she was walking through the palace. It was the 3rd night of the ball. When she pressed her hands to the trunk of a tree, she was opening the door of her room. When the tree opened to reveal a winding silver stair, and she put one foot on it, she was walking down into the king's ballroom, dressed in black gossamer. She could hear the sounds of the party below. As the tree sealed shut behind her, 2 arms came around her in the dark. "Together at last, my love," said the voice of the man of many coats. He stamped his foot on the silver stair split beneath, and the silver stair beneath them split beneath them like an egg. Imagine. That's such an odd thing to compare the stair breaking to. Jeez, they fell for a long time and landed on the back of a porous horse. It carried them through trees carved from bright minerals, past lakes of pale fire. Her senses now restored, the crew knew that they must be riding through the land of the dead. Smart as hell, this girl is. We still have a lot of stuff. The horse carried them to the doors of a jagged castle. There they were led to a receiving room where a great man sat in a fearsome repose. "Father," said her abductor, "I've brought home a bride." Ah, the girl thought. It is as he said. He is the quiet and the cold, and the thing that comes after the end. Not death, but his son. Just casually. Ah, that makes more sense. Death's son looked at her with pride, running his fingers over her throat, resting his thumb against her pulse. Even in your kingdom, her heart beats true. She's a worthy wife to the Prince of Death. Death made no reply to his boasting. "A dozen of my son's brides have crossed into my lands, and none of them lived for long. Who are you, that your heart beats so strongly in this place?" "I am a woodwife," she said, not daring to look at Death's son. "I am nobody." "She is not," Death's son began, but his father threw a hand up to silence him. "Lies do not become a bride, nor my daughter, whom you will be tomorrow once you're wed." "I am a woodwife," she repeated primly, "and married already." Death twitched his lips, cut fine as ice. "Your husband has not followed you here, and the rules of the living no longer bind you. You will remarry tomorrow, but first I ask again, who are you?" "I am a woodwife, who must now grieve the loss of my husband. I require 3 nights to mourn him before I can remarry." "Far be it from me to dishonor the custom of woodwives," Death said, his voice slow and dry as driftwood. "But time moves differently in the land of the dead. I will give you 2 nights, not 3, before you must marry." A translucent figure the color of cold tea, stepped forward to take the girl to her room. Before she could follow, something batted at her ankle. She looked down to find a tortoiseshell cat puddling at her feet. Because it was the first living creature she'd seen in Death's kingdom, and because it looked at her with such clever eyes, she leaned down to greet it. The cat spoke first. "They'll let you pick your chambers." It ran a tongue over its shoulder. "Be sure to choose the plainest room. No jewels, no hangings. Choose the room most fit for a woodwife." And then it paddled out of sight. Padded out of sight. Padded out of sight. So fun. So fun. Death's servant led the girl from room to room, each more wondrous than the last. She shook her head at each until the irritated shade showed her to a crude, windowless chamber. Empty, but for a mattress, a fireplace, and a hook for a cloak. "This one," the girl said. "This is where I'll stay." "And may it bring you joy," growled the servant. Though there was no firewood, they coaxed from the ashes a spectral flame. When she was alone, the girl knelt on the hard mattress, wondering why she'd listened to a cat. Then a scratching came at her door, and the creature let itself in. It warmed itself in front of the meager fire before speaking. "Well done, but not yet done. You must listen to me again, because I am your only friend here. You have not yet died, it's true, but even one such as you cannot withstand the land of death forever. Your wedding dress will be your shroud if you don't make haste." "One such as me?" the girl said. The cat ignored her, grooming each of its limbs in turn. "If you marry that stupid boy, Death will be your father-in-law. Tomorrow you must ask him for an early wedding gift. A kiss. No matter what he offers in its place, except only the kiss." Weird as hell, but sure. Kiss Death. Like Isla didn't try earlier. The girl promised to do so. The night she spent on her cold bed was long, and in the morning she rose exhausted. The servant fetched her, bringing her again before Death. He greeted her courteously, asked after her rest, and congratulated her that she had lived. "Thank you, father," she said gravely. "I hope I'm not presumptuous in addressing you this way. A little, perhaps, my daughter, but I will make an exception. Then I must risk offense once more, and ask you one thing, my wedding gift, early." "A wedding gift?" Death repeated in his slow red voice. "What do you wish of me? Something small," she said. "Will you grant it?" "I will, to make peace between us, and to show I do not take it lightly that my son stole you from your woodsman." She curtsied. "It's a small thing, as I say, in keeping with the custom of woodfolk." The night before a wedding, the groom's father must give his new daughter a kiss. Get your lies! Get your lies and go! Get your lies! Get your lies! Girl got death. Ooh. Death went still, and so the girl could feel its... So still the girl could feel it spreading. She was certain, for those moments, that all was moving in Death's realm. All but one small thing. In the room's farthest corner, tucked in a shadow, the tail of a tortoiseshell cat. Gotta love the cat. The cat has a plan. You may ask me for anything. Death said at last, anything but that. I have rooms full of jewels. Take your pick. I have the lifelights of adventurers, enchantresses, queens. You may hold them in your hands, judge their weight. Bismuth caverns and groves of tourmaline. Tourmaline! What do you desire? I would not know what to do with any of that, she said. Being the wife of a woodsman, I only wish for your approval, father, and your kiss. Chastely, she offered her cheek. It's just the cheek. Just a little cheek. Kiss me on the cheek, father. I'm not asking you to make out with me, I'm just asking for a cheek kiss, guys. It's just a cheek kiss. When he spoke again, His voice had deepened from red to black. "I gave you my word, and you will have your kiss, but I will not descend to you." It was harder than she thought it would be to climb the stairs to where Death sat in state, his long hands draped over the arms of his onyx throne. This close, she could see the swirl of his eyes, every color of leather, the charred wood shade of his skin, and the bladed curves of his mouth. Standing at his feet, she felt the life that ran through her like roots, and the places where it ran thinnest, her wrists and throat and temples. She turned her cheek to him like an animal turning its neck to the knife, and he pressed cold lips to her skin. She tasted salt and metal. She smelled ashes and dust. The blood in her ears rose like a wave as her vision transformed. She could see Death's hull truly now. Where before there were tapestries and bright lanterns, now there were peeling walls and guttering candles. Death's throne was in truth a tower of blackened bones, his rich red cloak tattered and eaten away. Only Death himself was unchanged. "Happy marriage to you, daughter," he said softly. "Now you see my home and yours with clearer eyes. I hope you do not regret your choice of gift." "Thank you, father," she managed. "On the contrary, it pleases me well." His castle was a place of horrors now, of bone and decay. Only her room remained the same, cold and cramped and nearly empty, but she was glad of it. She lay back on her cheerless bed, almost as quickly as she sat up again, looking at the hook on the wall. It was the only thing in the room that had changed. Now she saw the truth of it. It was only pretending to be a hook. It was really a keyhole. She waited for the cat. Soon its scratch came at the door, and it trotted in to stretch in front of her fire. The flames she could now see were the gray ghost of something that fretted inside, worrying itself into letting off a faint, sorrowful heat. The cat wormed its fur in front of the thing shamelessly. "Good girl," it said. "But just one night remains, and now you must find the key. Your fiancé will invite you to dinner tonight. To gloat at his conquest, say yes. Get him drunk, and make a wager. Tell him you can guess what he keeps in his innermost pocket. If you guess right, make him forfeit to you the thing he wears around his neck." And it laughed its hissing little laugh, leaning close to whisper the suitor's secret, what he kept in his inner pocket. The girl agreed, and all was as the cat predicted. A knock came at her door, and a servant bade her come down to join her fiancé at dinner. She was taken to a decaying hall, where he sat at the head of an ancient table. In a coat of thorns he watched her come. "Good evening, my love," he said. "You are far too somber for a bride. You must eat and be merry." The girl looked down the length of the table, and her eye was not fulled. Where delicate meats and golden pastries should be were all the flat-back black foods of the dead. She snubbed them, sitting beside her betrothed, and lifting a glass with liquid thick as blood. "Let us make merry, then." And she matched him, glass for glass, till he was drunk on Death's wine, made from the long purple grapes that grow from vineyards fertilized with battlefield blood. Her own wine she fed in secret to the cat, who nosed about her angles below the table. "I wonder how you live still," he mused. "I'd hoped you might. From the tales I heard of your birth, I knew you were something different." He leaned closer, confiding. "My father is old-fashioned, and would have an heir with me. You must survive long enough to provide it. Then, when we're done, so you may die or live, whichever I fancy, I think you'd better make me happy if you can." The girl was not a queen's daughter for nothing. She lifted her chin and her glass and smiled. Her hate. It smiled through her hate. "You will find me an amusing companion, I think." Her betrothed inclined his head slowly, moving with drunken care. "It amuses you to tell my father you are a woodwife. Perhaps you are not amused by the same things." "A wager, then. Might that serve to entertain?" "Depends." His voice dipped low, making a flirtatious hook that sought to catch her. She lowered her own to match it. "I bet you I can guess the thing you hide inside your clothes, in your innermost pocket." His eyes sparked interest. "And if you win the bet, what must I give you?" "Why, the thing you hold closest to your heart. The thing that hangs over it on a chain. I am to be your wife, after all." He searched her face. She kept it mild as milk. And if you lose, what do I get? A willing wife, of course. She held his gaze. Who only wants to please you. He set his glass down with a thump. Done. Did we learn nothing from the skinned maiden? Reject humanity, become bear. That's what she should have done in the first place. She should have found the girl from the Skin Maiden in the woods, because she's somewhere in the woods. Find her and just become her new sister. Just do that. The girl leaned back and spoke as if to herself. What does a man like you hide under his clothes? Something forgettable, to be sure. A thing no one would bother to seek. His hand tightened.